Story 1, you want me to escalate a claim? Sure, I used to work on the retentions department of an ISP back in the day. While many people called genuinely wanting to cancel their phone service, just as many knew that retentions was more than that. The ISP, let's call them Red Phone, had two different departments. I worked on retentions 1, where we did a lot of fixing bills and offering small discounts and slightly cheaper phones to customers who said they wanted to leave. Retentions 2 was for customers who were in the process of porting their numbers, and the worst thing they offered was a 50% discount for a couple of years with a decent phone for free. This happened roughly 10, maybe 12 years ago when roaming was straight up highway robbery. Let me introduce you to the executive. I got the call, I did my little introductory spiel, and I immediately discovered this guy was the most entitled POS I'd ever had the displeasure to speak to. He said he was a very important executive who traveled a lot for work, but the bill he got was ridiculous and I had to solve it or he was going to cancel his service. I muted him, so he heard nothing, but I could still hear what he said, and while I checked his account, I could hear him gloat to his girlfriend that he's getting the bill credited because he knows how to play the system, and he was an $a hole, but he wasn't wrong. This guy was a pro at playing Red Phone. He had the highest phone plan the company offered, which was around €90 at the time for one line, but paid €30 per month because he had discounts from both departments stacked on top of each other. His plan allowed him to get what at the time was a super expensive phone for basically nothing at retentions 2. He'd gotten the super shiny customer status and the super shiny customer service line, which usually meant a customer was averaging a €300 monthly bill, despite his €30 ARPU because he complained about how the delocalized customer service sucked. He was also not wrong about his bill being ridiculous. He'd visited several EU countries, got a €600 bill, called customer service, and said he had not known that roaming was so expensive. No one had warned him when he told us he was traveling overseas. The company had a policy that the first time a customer complained about something, we could refund them, particularly if the complaint was that the customer had not been informed about extra charges. So the rep informed him about roaming costs and refunded him all of the roaming charges, leaving the bill at €30. Second month comes around, he kept using the phone overseas, got a €1,500 bill. He calls customer service, they tell him they can't refund him again. He says he wants to cancel his account then, and gets transferred to me. He was demanding that we credited his roaming charges again, because if we can do it once we can do it again, and also because roaming prices were abusive. He did have a point there. I told him I couldn't do that, so he wanted me to open a claim and escalate it. I refused again because there was no one to escalate to, he wasn't going to get that credited. He insisted he wasn't hanging up until I escalated the issue because he wasn't informed, and if I kept the call going for much longer he was going to charge the company for his time because he was a busy man. At this point I'd been working there long enough that if you were nice or even normal I would try my damnedest to help you, but if you were a DCK? Sorry, can't do, get lost. Customer refuses to hang up, I can hung up. This guy, though? He'd gone past being a DCK into total Sintwaffle, and I was pissed off. I couldn't be a DCK back, but he'd been F-king around and I could make sure he found out, so I told him that okay, since he was so insistent I would open a claim to refund him the €1,500 bill, and muted him while I opened the claim. The $a hole was again gloating at his girlfriend about how clever he was because he was going to get this bill refunded too. Meanwhile, I was copy-pasting the notes from the previous month's claim, where the rep had written, I've informed customer of roaming charges in all the countries he told me he could be visiting, list of European countries. Also, stacking discounts? Very much not a thing. He had to spam the retentions 1 call centers with calls until he got a newbie lost enough to apply another discount over his retentions 2 discount. And he had not read the terms and conditions of the accounts, but I had. Trying to defraud the company was grounds for service termination. I got the claim number, flagged down my supervisor and told her to please send it to headquarters in the daily report so fraud could examine the account. I told the guy that the claim had been opened, but also that since it was obvious he was trying to abuse the company's policies, the claim had been flagged to be reviewed by fraud and it was likely his account would be terminated. He went from entitled to worried in 2 seconds and asked me to close the claim. Sorry, dude, can't do, you wanted a claim open, now it's open, yes, the customer was fired. Story 2, Boss Doesn't Understand Outlook, happened over a decade ago, before workplace chats were a regular thing. My boss at the time was an old-timer, I'm pretty sure he was past his retirement age. No grudge against that. He was very good at most aspects of his job, just set in his older ways. Often I would have to call a meeting with our colleagues in Japan with him included. For various reasons, he would get upset if I scheduled these without talking to him first about his schedule even though his calendar showed him as free. He insisted that I have this check-in directly with him in his office. The problem is, he wasn't always there, so what I would do was just send him an Outlook meeting invite to just him and him alone for the time I proposed to have this meeting. It was convenient because I was already looking at his availability in Outlook. He could accept if he works and then I could update the meeting with everyone else needed. He sees this and hollers at me to go to his office. He's a pretty big loud dude so everyone in my vicinity hears. He proceeds to ream me out for not doing what he asked. I'm sure he didn't understand that he was the only one on the invite and he wasn't appearing to decline the meeting in front of anyone. I tried to explain but then proceeds to say under no circumstance should I book a meeting with him without chatting with him in person. Sure enough, a day or two later a very important meeting request comes through for that afternoon with some higher-ups and he's not around for me to talk to as it was later in the day. My manager's number 2 who heard the minor fiasco above takes me aside and says I know what he just yelled at you about but I think you should just book that meeting. He didn't even need to be there, it was just proper for him to attend. Needless to say, I didn't, quoting what Boss Man said, and that meeting never happened that day. I vaguely remember him losing a few points for not being able to have this meeting, but nothing nuclear. Story 3, you work 8 hours a day and that's it, people asked, so I'm sharing a story from 20 years ago. I was a developer for a large financial services company and, because we lacked many tools, I was usually tasked with building various tools, scripts, reports, etc. to help automate the environment and really just worked around the inadequacies of our off-the-shelf tools. At my peak, I probably had around 300 apps and/or scripts in production. Due to the number of asks from leadership and to keep the lights on, I usually booked anywhere from 4 to 10 hours of overtime per week. After about a year, I got a new boss who decided that she would ensure that I take no overtime for any reason. She proclaimed that I would only be allowed to 8 hours per day and not a moment more. No exceptions. I wasn't a full-time employee, so I didn't have any grounds to push back. I usually started at 8, so with my 30-minute lunch, that meant my new hours were 8 to 4:30. Flash forward to later that same week, an upstream system changed their data feed and it corrupted one of our downstream systems. Stuff like this happened often enough that I had translation tools built to resolve any of those feed-related issues, but even then, I still had to spend a few minutes figuring out what changed in order to adjust my own code. Anyway, as the operations have come to a halt, my boss and her boss are looking over my shoulder as I'm diagnosing the feed problem, which I found pretty quickly. The clock strikes 4:30 and I lock my computer, stand up from my desk, and say, well, it's 4:30. That's my 8 hours. I'll see you tomorrow, and walk out. The look of confusion, rage, and exasperation was just blows chef's kiss. At this point, all of our overnight backups have stopped and will not run until I resolve things. This means a global financial institution no longer has any data backups being made for that entire night and will be completely screwed if, well, anything happens. Flash forward to the next morning as I walk to my desk at 7:56, as I made sure to never be in a situation where I could be called out as coming in late. My boss's boss is waiting for me. He directs me into his office and very calmly says, moving forward, I'll manage your time sheet and you can take as many hours as you need. I left that job about 4 to 5 months later and the entire building was laid off about 2 months after that. Only 2 of about 200 people weren't laid off, and one of those people was the guy I hired to backfill me as someone had to keep all the code running. Story 4, no one leaves till 5 p.m. but no overtime? Bet. Several years ago I worked for a aerospace manufacturing company. You already know this won't end well, as a setup operator, meaning my job was to arrive before shift start, usually 3 or 4 hours early, make sure all the 5-axis mills were calibrated. The ATC, automatic tool changer, magazines were all loaded correctly and the tooling was in good condition, nothing dulled or broken. If there was damaged tooling, part of the process was removing the carrier, replacing the cutter and resetting the cutter height with a gauge, making it so that the tip of every cutter is in the exact same position for that particular holder every time. After being there for several years, the company eventually gets acquired and new management comes in there. From 3 or 4 in the morning until 1 or 2 p.m., sometimes earlier if a new job gets added to the floor. Schedule works fine for me, I get to beat traffic both ways and the pay is a bit higher due to the differential. After a few weeks it gets noticed that I constantly leave early and always run over on hours, so they implement a new policy. Work starts at 9 a.m. and runs till 5, you have to be on the floor ready to go when the clock hits 9 o'clock. I try to explain to my new boss exactly why I leave early, but he's more concerned about numbers and cash flow than what I actually do there. So fine, you want 9 to 5. I'll work 9 to 5. Instead of punching in at 4, I chill in my car till 8:45 and roll into the building. Wait till exactly 9 and punch, then head to the floor. Roll up to the first house on the line and hit the E-stop, which shuts the machine down instantly. Tell the operator this hasn't been set up yet and they need to wait till it's ready. Head down the line and punch everyone I pass, telling them the same thing: not ready, go wait. I start at the end of the line with my platen and gauges and start calibrating the entire magazine, verifying everything in there is in spec and ready to be used. Get the magazine done and home the probe so the machine knows where it is in 3D space and move to the next. That was about 40 minutes since I took my time. Meanwhile the rest of the line is dead in the water. Nobody can do any work until their deck passes calibration and is certified to use. I'm part way through the second unit when I have my new manager breathing down my neck. Why is nothing running? What's going on? Etc. 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 I sit back on my haunches and calmly explain to him, this is my job, the one that until today I used to come in hours early to do, as to not mess with the production schedule. I need to get this done, should be ready to start the line in another 5 or 6 hours, boss. I'm told to unlock and get the line moving. No can do, none of these machines are checked and I'm not signing off on the certification until I'm done. Anything not certified is a instant QC reject. Choose, run the line and reject $1 mill in parts, or let me finish and lose $1 mill in production time and I go back to my old schedule tomorrow. The plant got a day paid to do nothing. I got the new boss off my back and he got reamed all to hell for losing a day's production. Story 5, no fashion boots allowed. TL:DR homophobic school staff changed dress code rules just so I couldn't wear a pair of women boots, so my dad bought me the most obnoxious sparkly queer looking cowboy boots out there that technically fit the dress code. A few years back when I was in high school, I lived in a small country town as a very flamboyant, obviously queer teenage boy without even needing to say anything. Needless to say, I was definitely the most popular kid in school and everyone was totally supportive. Even the staff at the school wasn't the biggest fan of me, unfortunately, even though I was not so straight a student who never caused any trouble. Luckily, being raised on a very literal farm, my family was and continues to be really supportive. They knew how interested I am in fashion and my parents surprised me on my birthday with this pair of heeled Doc Marten Chelsea boots I had been saving up for. Obviously I was ecstatic and wore them constantly both in and out of school for about a week before I was dress coded for them. Unfortunately, this was not my first time being dress coded because of my tendency to wear more feminine clothing, so I had developed the habit of carrying the dress code pamphlet on me in my bag to prove my innocence, because I really was never breaking any rules, they just happened to not like what I was wearing. I pointed out that there was nothing about boots or heels, and my teacher just sort of scoffed at me and told me to go to the front office. Apparently they had updated it, and if I had read the newsletter that morning I would have known that. I went up to the front office and true to what she had said they had added a rule to the effect of work boots were allowed but no fashion boots. Unfortunately it was very obviously targeted because no one male or female was wearing anything like that except for me. My parents knew that too when I got home and told them about it they were furious for me. My dad took me out the very next day after school to a boot store and quite literally bought me a $300 pair of women's black work boots, that were completed with even some sparkly rhinestones on them. Quite frankly these boots made me look more queer than the first pair ever did and I loved them. I wore these proudly with a black sparkly hat I already owned to school the next day and didn't even make it to second period before I was called to the front office for violating dress code. The assistant principal told me these were obviously violating dress code and I insisted that these were work boots and practically every other kid wore cowboy boots to school every single day so there couldn't possibly be a problem with mine. She wouldn't budge and neither would I so my parents were called and it was escalated to the principal. Luckily we expected this and were prepared. My dad showed up in all of his fresh off the farm dirt covered glory to my principal office. The conversation went to the effect of her sitting there telling my father those are very obviously for fashion and are violating dress code and my father would respond something to the effect of how do you know what my kid chooses to wear to work in? Since when is wearing boots breaking dress code? Look at everyone else and this went back and forth for quite frankly an embarrassing amount of the time but by the end I was allowed to wear my boots. Much to the annoyance of my old high school staff I wore those damn black sparkly boots practically every day for the rest of my high school experience and then 3 years later when I was long gone in college my little sister, an open and proud lesbian by the way, entered high school. We just happened to have the same shoe size and I didn't mind loaning her the boots. She is a junior now and continuing my legacy of terrorizing the homophobic teachers and staff by wearing those same shoes to school, which held up amazing by the way, to this day. Story 6, 40 feet exactly? Yes ma'am, it'll be my pleasure. TLDR, woman wants me to spray 40 feet exactly. Tape measure was acquired. As of the beginning of this year I work in pest control and it has been quite a pleasant experience all things considered. I get to meet some cool people, hear old folks' wisdom, and meet lots and lots of doggos and cats. The downside? The rich snobs and the Karens. I am not a very confrontational person and will always try to find a middle ground where both sides are happy. However, when I am tired or just don't give a crap, I can be a little petty. One such occasion happened around the end of July or August. When me and my coworkers, go to service a home, we do service the yards unlike some other companies that will just do interior and foundation of the home. However, since some yards are very large we only go out to 40 feet and spot treat the remainder of the yard. 99% of people are fine with that. This lady who is the star of this event was fine with the 40 feet. I serviced the interior of her home first, and noticed that she was following me around and nitpicking my work. This isn't uncommon but she was being extra rude and it was the end of the day so my patience was nearly gone. When I moved to the outside and began with the yard, she immediately started yelling at me saying, "That's not 40 feet. Our sprayers on a full charge, which mine was, will shoot roughly 25 feet, so I went 25 feet out and was doing a slow walk to cover the 40 feet. I tried to explain this to her but she yelled, "You said 40 feet so it has to be 40 feet exactly, 40 feet exactly?" My pleasure. Without another word I went to my truck, grabbed my toolbox, and got out my tape measure and measured out 40 feet. I then did another test spray and wouldn't you know it, I was spraying 50 feet. I turned to her and said, "I apologize ma'am, I was overspraying your yard. Let me fix that for you." She returned inside without another word and I finished up and left. If she did report me, my boss didn't say anything. The one nice thing about her home though was she had a cute dog. I have many other stories from just the last 6 months so if anyone is wanting some fun, scary, or downright laughable stories, let me know where I can post them as I am not on Reddit much. Story 7, I'm going to be president. Sure you are, TLDR first. had a boss who constantly talked badly about everyone who quit when he realized he wasn't ever going to be in charge, and despite his efforts I followed his orders and made sure everyone knew it was all his own fault. Background: I joined this Japanese-based company a few years ago as a production assistant. I wasn't assisting anyone in production. I was the only American, the only one fully fluent in both languages, still am. Still looking for a better line of work, so I ended up helping everyone else in some fashion or another. Well, I also had to do my own work, of course, but when things shipped behind schedule it was made out to be my fault. I helped our shipping manager send things out and receive them, count, quality check them, weigh the boxes, palletize them, etc. Our sales manager, the man himself in question, constantly asked me to double-check his emails so he sounded more natural and professional, and even had me get involved on numerous occasions to help him save face or placate customers. From the time that I started, we'd been struggling to keep time because of inventory issues. These issues were both because our customer didn't keep accurate numbers and neither did we, not just for the parts they sent us for assembly but also for the boxes we used to package the order before shipping. Boxes I used, and only I used. Boxes I was not allowed to order, but had to ask Mr. Sales Manager to order for me. Well, he would forget to order them. And then I'd remind him. And he'd forget again. Only ordering days later, it happened enough times that our customer finally demanded we count up our inventory. I made an Excel sheet, made it legible in both ENG/JPN, color-coded areas of concern. And I also added everything we used in the office, from boxes only used by shipping, to gloves, to the parts from our biggest customer as they were demanding we count. Everything got counted, everything was put in that document, and I made sure to include a field of when it was last counted. Result: suddenly we're making good time and getting ahead and I don't have to worry about boxes. Now, this entire time, Mr. Sales was working on a 20-page document that proved our president didn't do his job, trying to report him to the JP Home Office and get him fired. My two co-workers got a glimpse of it and saw there were sections on all of US too. Bad-mouthing our work, trying to make it seem like only Mr. Sales was on the up and up. Finally, the JP parent company sends someone. This guy is, unknown to all of us, the son-in-law of the company owner of a family-owned and run company, pretty common in Japan. Well, only I and our shipping manager learn of this, since we actually talk to the guy. But Mr. Sales likes to treat him like a goof and poke fun at him. This guy JP sent to us, he carefully plans meetings with us for while Mr. Sales is out of the office, and interviews all of us about what's been up at our USA branch, our late shipments come up, and my pattern of shipping late and insulting our biggest customer with my laziness. There's also reports of me being on my phone too much, preoccupied watching videos or listening to music and not working. I start pulling out the emails, and the inventory I was told to create. I show him the inventory history and my emails asking for Mr. Sales to do his job from before it was made. I show him the ship dates and the differences before and after I made the inventory file. Fallout: a friend of mine in Japan is suicidal, and I'd lost contact with him a few times. I decide to go to Japan and help him out, try to live there, but at best I have 6 months of savings. That means I have to leave the company. I know this guy from JP is going to arrive and all Mr. Sales' delusions of being USA branch president will die. But I couldn't be there to see it. So I went to Japan, spent my 6 months successfully. Friend re-entered college to chase his dreams instead of being a dead-eyed salaryman. He's on the mend, and returned to the US a few months ago. I get in contact with the company, and they rehire me. Now that I'm here, I learn Mr. Sales quit shortly after I left. But not before he aired every last thing he had told me would stay between us and take all but a literal dump on my desk. I check my old inventory file. He zeroed it out. The company has been shipping late again, hired a new guy to do my job that's been getting parts returned to fix errors numerous times, something that only happened to me once. Do they want me to fix any of that? No. Here's a book of local businesses. Call them, drum up customers. Oh. Okay. Can do. Thanks for the paycheck for doing something so easy that won't ever work, I guess.